When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, smile. User, bjet123. Posted, September 19th, 1996.
By the third time I'd passed the rundown Sunoco, I had to admit I'd remembered wrong. That, or the station, had been rebranded since my last time through, which was unlikely given the cobwebs and dirt accumulated in the corners of its greasy windows. Nothing around there had been refreshed for a long time. I hadn't been on the road for close to 10 years, so more likely my memory was to blame. Once I'd accepted then this was the right gas station, finding my hotel only took a few minutes more. That, at least, had stayed exactly the way I'd recalled it, a rectangular nicotine yellow two-story building backing onto a forest which also surrounded the comically large parking lot out front. All signage related to whatever national chain it had belonged to before management failed to keep up their franchise payments had been removed, so the buzzing fluorescent sign I parked under just read, "Hotel." Inside wasn't much better. Cigarette burn holes dotted the patterned carpet, itself unchanged since the Carter administration. Everything smelled of mildew. Behind the check-in desk, a rail-thin girl with bad acne and mousy brown hair looked glassily in my direction. "Hey," I said, approaching the counter. "I've got a reservation. Should be under Ben Stapleton." Nothing. She hadn't been looking at me, I realized, as much as she had been my general direction. I tried again. "Excuse me, Miss Stapleton. My company should have called ahead." From somewhere down the too bright hallway, a nature documentary was playing at maximum volume. Beneath it, I could hear moaning or crying. I couldn't tell which. The girl's eyes slowly focused on me. It was as if she'd left her body and only just returned. She dully flipped the pages of the black reservation book in front of her. "We don't have any reservations for tonight, Mr. Littleton." I sighed, took a deep breath. My late 20s had been spent driving back and forth across flyover country, helping install canning lines in towns like this. I hated it then, and their economies had been booming. Now, in my 40s, no one bought lines anymore. They just desperately needed to hang on to the ones they had, and none of the kids management kept hiring could fix much beyond a cup of coffee. I'd been back on the road for 6 months, pinballing between places that looked like someone had run them through the photocopier too many times. Rosie in logistics had made the reservation. Of that, there was no doubt. Whoever had taken the call had been too high to write it down. "That's fine. Do you have a room at the front of the building?" She considered the question, her eyes wandering across the lobby as if seeing it for the first time. Eventually, it was my turn again, and she nodded. It took a few minutes to negotiate the details, but eventually I got the key to a double room on the second floor overlooking the parking lot. After a brief trip back outside to grab my duffel bags, I went upstairs. To my surprise, the room smelled cleaner than the lobby had, and the light pink carpet was stain-free. I flipped on the bedside lamp and stood in front of the window, looking down at the rental car, a gray Pontiac Tempest. It was a piece of shit, another in a long line of American-made rattletraps furnished by whatever fleabag agency my company had negotiated a deal with. Still, no matter how ugly or uncomfortable it was, being able to see it from my room was soothing. In fact, being able to have a room with a view of the parking lot was a deal breaker for me, no matter where I stayed. If anyone ever asked me why, I'd tell them it was for security reasons. If thieves knew a corporate repair guy was in town, they might try to target his car, thinking there could be tools in there worth pawning. It sounded reasonable, and since I'd spent so much time on the road, no one ever questioned it. Thing is, it was bullshit. I did it because of a dream. This was towards the end of my first stint as a technician at large, when the shine had worn off the apple of sleeping with strangers I'd never have to see again and having someone else pay for my meals. Work had kept me in Nebraska for almost a month, moving hotels a couple times during that period. The last place they put me up was called the Carlisle, a nicer than usual spot off I-80, southwest of Omaha. My room looked out onto the rear of the building where a row of thick trees had been planted so guests wouldn't have to look at the concrete warehouses next door. Halfway through that week, I had one hell of a nightmare. In it, I woke up to the sound of a fire alarm. This wasn't a first for me, so I quickly threw on my jeans and a t-shirt before slipping into a pair of loafers. The back lot outside my window was a sea of darkness, as if the world had gone away while I slept. Hastily, I closed the curtains and headed out the door. Despite the ear-piercing noise, not a single other guest had left their room. I covered my ears and beelined it down the corridor toward the fire exit. Instead of rounding the corner to an exterior door, which I knew should have been there because I'd seen it on the way in, I found myself looking down another identical hallway. My head swam. This wasn't right, I thought, but there at the end was that same fire exit sign, so maybe I'd gotten it wrong before. Still shielding my ears, I jogged this second length and turned right, finding yet another hotel corridor. And then another one, and another after that. No matter how fast I ran or in which direction, the end result was the same. Non-stop ringing and hallways without end. Just when I thought I was going to run through the hotel forever, someone else appeared. A man in blue jeans and a ripped denim jacket standing half the hall length away from me, a dark blue baseball cap pulled down over his curly brown hair. I was so surprised to see him that it took me a moment to notice the alarm had suddenly stopped, leaving us in silence. I couldn't see anything except his back, yet the relieved greeting I was about to call died on my lips. He was already speaking. "You're too early, Ben, but I'll see you." The man turned towards me, my body refusing to cooperate when I willed it to look away. If I saw his face, there would be no going back. It was truth I felt in my bones, even if I didn't know why. And then I woke up, shaking and sweating, making things worse. When I opened the curtains to get some light, it was pitch black outside, exactly the way it had been in the dream. It took everything I had not to scream. Ever since then, I refused to stay anywhere but right at the front of a hotel, preferably with the car in view because there was always light of some kind, and if worse came to worse, I could put a chair through the window and get out that way. I never had that nightmare again, but the man, I would see him again in the real world. Never his face, of course. I would recognize him by his clothes, the blue jeans, jacket, and cap moving quickly ahead of me on the street, gone a second later, always facing away from me. My stomach rumbled while I stood at the streaked window. There had been a roadhouse, maybe a minute's drive down the road, the kind of place where, if you timed it right, you could get a 90s-sized burger at 80s prices without someone trying to put the boots to you. I badly needed to stretch my legs, and there was more than enough daylight for me to get there, have dinner, and get back before nightfall. This wasn't about my dream. After dark, the parking lot would no doubt fill with motorcycles, and the chances of some wild-eyed biker looking for an excuse to start something went way, way up. I hadn't been wrong about either the burger or the price, and chased dinner with a couple of pints of beer in total peace. Problem came when I couldn't catch the waitress's eye to get my check. For the better part of half an hour, she had been on a payphone in the narrow bathroom hallway, arguing in a low voice. The remaining bartender, a fat, bald man with a long ZZ Top beard, kept casting a glance her way and sighing heavily. I had also been right about the Roadhouse's clientele, and the longer I sat there, the more it filled up with hard-faced men, the back of their leather jackets covered in a patch that identified them as part of a motorcycle club's local chapter. Most of them ignored me, but a thin, blade-faced biker with a shock of ginger hair piled atop his head and an Elvis-like pompadour kept looking my way and scowling. After another 10 minutes, every seat at the Roadhouse's long, polished bar was full. Fresh off a round of shots, Ginger Elvis had dropped any pretense of subtlety, nudging some of his buddies, then nodding in my direction. His eyes were hard and bright. It was time to go. I tossed enough cash on the table to cover my bill and split, dodging through the crowd so Elvis couldn't see which door I was leaving through. Once I made it outside, the tension left my body. Experience has taught me that guys like him are a line-of-sight predators. You stop existing once they can't see you anymore. Night had fallen, and I took in a lungful of humid Midwestern air among the predicted fleet of chromed-out Harley-Davidsons. A canvas of stars shone in the sky, lighting my way down the tree-lined access road back to my hotel. I was struck by the stillness, how I couldn't even hear the hum of traffic on the interstate. To break the spell, I whistled tunelessly the whole way home, stopping only when it occurred to me that I'd entered the hotel parking lot, but the street lights and signage were dark. Even the stars above were obscured by clouds. The only light came from inside the hotel's lobby, which suddenly seemed so very far away. All I could see around me was the boxy shapes of cars in varying shades of gray and black. Irrational panic welled up in me, an old instinct telling me to run, but to where? My car keys were in the room, and if I was going that far, then why not just crawl into bed? I took another deep breath, the air noticeably colder than before. My shoes crunched loudly on the gravel as the lobby lights got closer. Maybe 20 yards in, another set of steps joined mine, an echo crunching almost exactly in sync. I walked faster, resisting the urge to sprint. Only prey runs. I knew that much. Even so, I was about to break for the door until my own tuneless whistling sounded out from over my shoulder. "Hey, Benny boy." There was no mistaking that voice. No matter how much time had passed since I first heard it, it was low, almost a whisper, and I knew if I turned around, it would be coming from a man who should not exist, a man in a blue baseball cap. "I told you I'd see you again." My resolve failed, and I ran, legs burning for the light. He kept pace, never more than a few feet behind. As I reached the lobby doors, I had to raise my eyes to find their handle, and that's when it happened. There, I mistakenly glanced at the face I saw reflected in the glass. Nightmare and reality became indistinguishable from one another. The last thing I remember seeing before everything went white was a skeletal smile.
Subject, the Slick. User, XM0T0R1NX. Posted, December 10th, 1997.
I was halfway through my second pack of smokes when I noticed the puddle. It was just me in the garage that night, doing an oil change on a battered old sedan some farmer had dropped off earlier. The place was quiet except for the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights and the occasional hiss of the heater kicking on. It was the kind of quiet where you can hear yourself breathing. I'd been working there for 10 years, and I knew every sound and smell that shop had to offer. Oil, grease, rust, and rubber, it all blends together after a while. But that night, there was something else hanging in the air. Something thick and sweet, like burnt sugar left too long on the stove. At first, I thought it was a leak from the car. Wouldn't be the first time, but when I stopped back to check, I saw the puddle wasn't coming from the oil pan. It was forming on the concrete floor, about 6 feet from the car, slow and deliberate, like it was bleeding up from under the slab. I crouched down, squinting. The stuff was thick, dark, and shiny. Oil, I thought. It has to be, but it moved. Not like oil spreads when it hits a flat surface. This moved like it was alive. A tendril peeled off from the edge of the puddle, snaking toward my boot. I shot up so fast I smacked my head on the lift. The clanging echoed through the shop, and for a second, all I could hear was my own heart pounding in my ears. I grabbed a rag and wiped my hands. "Get your shit together," I muttered. "You're just tired." But when I looked back, the puddle was gone. An hour later, I was working under the hood, trying to ignore the chill creeping up my spine. Every so often, I thought I heard something wet slapping against the concrete, like somebody dragging a mop across the floor, and then I saw it again. The puddle was back, bigger this time. It wasn't flat like a normal spill either. It had depth. I could see down into it, like staring into a bottomless pit. My throat went dry. Something shifted beneath the surface. A bubble rose and popped, releasing a foul stench that made my stomach turn, and then I saw the fingers. They were pale and slick, pushing up from the black, grasping for the edge like someone trying to pull themselves out. I stumbled backward, knocking over the oil pan with a loud clang. The sound seemed to wake it up. The fingers gripped the floor and something began hauling itself out. It wasn't a man. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen. Its skin glistened like raw meat, and its face, if you could call it that, was smooth and featureless, except for a slit that peeled open into rows of tiny needle-like teeth. It let out a sound like air hissing from a punctured tire and started dragging itself toward me. I bolted. The office door was just a few feet away, but my boots felt heavy, like the air had thickened. I made it inside, slammed the door, and locked it. Through the little window, I saw the creature slither across the floor, the black puddle spread beneath it like a shadow, swallowing every tool, rag, and drop of oil in its path. It stopped at the door. For a long moment, it didn't move. Then, a tendril of black reached up and pressed against the glass. It began to spread across the window, thin at first, then thicker until the entire pane was covered in writhing, inky black. The room smelled like rot and gasoline. I backed away, fumbling for the phone, and a dead line, of course. I don't know how long I've been sitting here, staring at that window, and the black stuff just keeps pressing against the glass, spiderweb cracks forming. I can hear it breathing now, wet, ragged, hungry. It's not just in the shop anymore. It's in the walls. It's under the floor. It's everywhere, and I think it knows I can't stay locked in here forever.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.